My daughter-in-law announced she was pregnant for the fourth time, but I was exhausted from raising her children as if they were my own. Then I left, but she called the police on me, and that's when everything unfolded. What I never imagined was that calling the police would be the beginning of the cruelest war I've experienced in my 67 years of life. I'm Betty, and for 6 never-ending years, I've been the real mother to 3 grandchildren, while their actual mother, Tiffany, lived as if she didn't have kids. When she gave me the news of the 4th pregnancy, something inside me snapped. It wasn't joy. It wasn't excitement. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Because I knew exactly what it meant. Another baby for me to raise while she kept hopping from party to party. It all started 6 years ago when my first grandchild was born. Tiffany was barely 23, and I thought it was normal for a first-time mother to need help. It will only be temporary, I kept telling myself. It's normal for her to be nervous. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into an endless nightmare. Michael, my son, worked morning until night to support his new family, so the responsibility fell completely onto my shoulders. At first, it was just in the afternoons. "Betty, can you watch the baby while I run to the grocery store?" Then it turned into, "Betty, I have a doctor's appointment. Can you keep him?" And little by little, without me realizing it, I became the full-time nanny. Tiffany started going out with her friends on Friday nights, then Saturdays too, then Sunday afternoons. She always had the perfect excuse, always a reason why she couldn't take care of her own child. When the second baby arrived 4 years ago, I was already trapped. Tiffany didn't even pretend she was going to change. She would arrive at my house at 8 o'clock in the morning, drop off the 2 kids, and disappear until night. "I have things to do," she would tell me, as if raising her children wasn't one of those things. My days began at 6 o'clock in the morning preparing breakfasts, changing diapers, and ended at 10 o'clock at night when I finally managed to put the little ones to bed. I spent my entire pension on them: diapers, formula, clothes, toys, medicine when they got sick. I calculated once, and in those years I had spent more than $50,000 of my savings. Money I had saved for my old age, for my own needs, went directly to supporting the children of a woman who preferred to spend her money on new clothes and nights out in Los Angeles. The 3rd grandchild arrived 2 years ago, and by then I was no longer Betty, the affectionate grandmother. I was Betty, the household slave. 3 children under 6 running around my house, yelling, fighting, while I ran after them as if I were 20 years old again. My knees ached, my back was killing me, but there was no rest. Tiffany had turned my home in San Diego into her personal free daycare. The worst part was that she acted as if she were doing me a favor by letting me watch my grandchildren, as if I should be grateful for the opportunity to raise them. Never a genuine thank you, never any recognition for everything I did. On the contrary, if I ever complained, she would reply, "But Betty, they're your grandkids. Don't you love them?" As if love meant I had to completely sacrifice my life for someone else's irresponsibility. My friends stopped inviting me to their get-togethers because I always had to decline. "I can't. I have the kids." My social life completely vanished. I couldn't go to the doctor without taking 3 little ones with me. I couldn't go shopping without carrying strollers and diaper bags. I couldn't even take a nap in the afternoons because someone was always crying, someone was hungry, someone needed attention. And there she was, at my doorstep, with a radiant smile, stroking her barely bulging belly, telling me, "Betty, we have wonderful news. We're having another baby." As if it were the greatest blessing in the world. As if she didn't see the permanent dark circles under my eyes. as if she didn't notice that I had aged 10 years in shadows in the last 6. At that moment, something inside me broke forever. I couldn't do it anymore. When Tiffany finished giving me the wonderful news of her 4th pregnancy, I stayed silent for several minutes. She kept talking excitedly about names, about how the other children would be happy to have another little sibling, about how blessed she felt. But I could only think of one thing. I just couldn't do it anymore. My body, my mind, my heart, everything was at its limit. "You're not excited, Betty?" she asked when she noticed my silence. "You're going to have another beautiful grandchild." And that's when I exploded. I didn't yell, I didn't raise my voice. I simply told her with a calm I didn't recognize in myself, "Tiffany, I'm not going to watch this baby. I can't do it anymore." Her smile faded as if she had been slapped. "What do you mean you're not going to watch him? You're their grandmother," she replied, as if that was enough explanation for me to sacrifice another 3 years of my life. I explained to her that for 6 years I had raised her children while she lived like a single woman, that I had spent all my savings, that I had lost my health, that I no longer had a life of my own. But Tiffany wasn't listening. She just repeated over and over, "But they're your grandkids, Betty. You love them, right? A grandmother who loves her grandchildren does anything for them." It was her favorite manipulation, turning my love for the children into an obligation to serve her forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I checked my finances again, and the reality was devastating. Of the $80,000 I had saved for my old age, I only had $28,000 left. I had spent $52,000 in 6 years raising the children of a woman who spent her money on designer clothes and dinners at expensive restaurants. While I was buying diapers with my pension, she was buying $300 handbags. The next day, Tiffany arrived as always at 8 o'clock sharp in the morning with the 3 children. But this time, I was waiting for her at the door. "No," I told her simply. "Not today." Her face contorted into a grimace of disbelief. "What do you mean you—" "No, I have important things to do." She always had important things to do. Going to the nail salon was important. Lunch with her friends was important. But raising her own children, that was never important. "Well, you're going to have to do those important things with your children," I replied, "because I'm not your free nanny anymore." Tiffany stood at my door for 10 minutes, waiting for me to change my mind, to open it as I always had. But for the first time in 6 years, I kept my door shut. That afternoon, I received 5 calls from my son, Michael. Tiffany had run to tell him that his evil mother was refusing to watch her own grandchildren. "Mum, what's wrong with you? Tiffany is crying. She says you won't help her with the kids." The word help cut me like a knife. Helping is something you do occasionally, not something that consumes your entire life. I explained to Michael everything that had happened in those 6 years, how I had spent my money, how I had lost my health, how I hadn't had a single day off. But he just repeated the same thing as his wife. "But Mum, they're your grandkids. Don't you love them?" As if loving meant destroying myself for their convenience. "Michael," I told him, "I love my grandchildren more than my own life, but I am not going to continue being a slave to a woman who doesn't want to be a mother." My son fell silent. I think for the first time in years, he really heard what I was telling him. But Tiffany wasn't going to give up so easily. Over the next week, she implemented her favorite strategy, emotional blackmail. She brought the children to my door every day. The kids cried, asking me to let them in as always. "Grandma Betty, why don't you love us anymore?" My heart broke every time, but I knew that if I gave in even once, we would be back in the same hellish cycle. Tiffany had told the children that Grandma Betty didn't love them anymore, which is why they couldn't play at my house. She was using my own grandchildren as emotional weapons against me. It was cruel and manipulative, but effective. Every time I saw their sad little faces pressed against my window, I felt like I was the villain in the story. On Friday of that week, Tiffany showed up at my door with a new strategy. She was accompanied by her sister, Sharon, who started yelling at me as soon as she saw me. "You're a horrible grandmother. How can you abandon these innocent children?" Sharon knew nothing of what I had lived through for 6 years, but she felt entitled to judge me. "If you think it's so horrible for a grandmother not to watch her grandchildren," I replied, "then you can watch them. Tiffany can bring them to your house every day." Sharon immediately fell silent. It was easy to judge from the outside, but no one really wanted to take responsibility. That night, while I was having dinner alone in my house for the first time in 6 years, feeling that strange mix of freedom and guilt, the doorbell rang. It was 9 o'clock at night. I opened the door and there they were, 2 police officers, with Tiffany standing behind them with a triumphant smile. "Ma'am Betty," the senior officer said to me, "we received a complaint of child neglect. This woman says you refuse to watch your grandchildren and that the children are in danger." My world stopped. Tiffany had called the police. She had gone so far as to involve the authorities because I refused to be her slave. "Officer," I said with all the dignity I could muster, "those children are not neglected. They are with their parents, where they should be. I am the grandmother, not the mother. I have no legal obligation to care for someone else's children." But Tiffany had already prepared her version of events. According to her, I had been the primary caregiver for years and had now abruptly abandoned the children without explanation. The police officers explained that while there was nothing illegal about my decision, they wanted to make sure the children were okay. I had to show them messages, photos, any evidence that Tiffany was a negligent mother who had abused my kindness for years. When the officers left, after confirming that the children were safe in their own home with their parents, Tiffany remained standing at my door. Her triumphant smile had disappeared. "This isn't going to end here, Betty," she told me in a cold voice I had never heard from her. "I'm going to show you who has the power here." And that's when I knew the war was just beginning. After that night with the police, I thought Tiffany would calm down and understand that she couldn't keep manipulating me. How naive I was. What followed were the 3 most hellish weeks of my life, where I discovered how far a person can go when they lose control over someone they had been exploiting for years. The day after the police visit, Tiffany implemented her new strategy: total siege. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the messages started arriving on my phone. "Betty, the baby is crying and I don't know what to do. I need you to come over. Betty, I don't have money to buy formula. The children are going to starve. Betty, I'm pregnant and I feel sick. I can't watch 3 children alone." Each message was more dramatic than the last. According to Tiffany, if I didn't give in, the children would die of hunger, they would get sick, they would suffer psychological trauma. Everything was my fault for being a selfish grandmother who cared more about her comfort than her grandchildren's well-being. I received between 20 and 30 messages daily, all full of manipulation and emotional blackmail. But the worst part came when she started using the children as messengers. She sent them to knock on my door with little cards that read things like, "Grandma Betty, Mummy says you don't love us anymore. Is it true you don't want us?" Imagine the pain of reading those words written in the shaky handwriting of a 5-year-old child. Tiffany had turned my own grandchildren into soldiers in her psychological war against me. One afternoon, the 4-year-old showed up alone at my door, crying. "Grandma, Mummy says if you don't come watch us, Daddy is going to leave the house, and we'll be left with no money. It was a lie, of course. But how do you explain that to a 4-year-old? I hugged her. I comforted her. But I didn't open my door. I knew that if I did, we would be back in the same vicious circle. That night, I received a call from Michael that broke my heart. Mum, Tiffany is really bad. She cries all day, says she can't handle the 3 kids alone. She's pregnant. She's stressed. The kids are suffering too. They ask about you all the time. My son sounded desperate, exhausted. For the first time, he was realizing what I had been carrying for 6 years. Michael, I told him, if Tiffany can't watch 3 children, why did she decide to have a 4th? If she's so overwhelmed, why did she never stay home to watch them herself all these years? My son had no answers. He just repeated that he needed me to be understanding and help the family. But understanding had run out a long time ago. For 6 years, I was more than understanding. I was a saint. I understood when Tiffany needed time for herself. I understood when she went on a trip with friends, leaving me with sick children. I understood when she spent the diaper money on new shoes. I had no more understanding left to give. The following week, Tiffany escalated her campaign. She started calling all my relatives, telling them her distorted version of events. According to her, I had gone crazy overnight and had cruelly abandoned my grandchildren. She didn't mention the 6 years of exploitation. She didn't talk about all the money I had spent. She didn't talk about her constant outings while I raised her children. My sister-in-law, Susan, called me, scandalized. Betty, what is wrong with you? Tiffany told me you said you weren't going to watch the kids anymore. Those poor babies need you. When I tried to explain the real situation, she cut me off. Don't give me excuses. A grandmother should always be there for her grandchildren. It was easy to judge from the comfort of her own home, without having lived a single day of what I had lived. Other relatives started avoiding me. At family gatherings, I felt their looks of disapproval, their whispers behind my back. Tiffany had managed to paint me as the villain in the story, as an unnatural grandmother who had abandoned innocent children out of pure selfishness. But what truly devastated me was when my own sister, Sharon, confronted me. Betty, you were always proud, but this is too much. Those children are not to blame for the problems between you and Tiffany. They need you. When I tried to explain everything I had been through, she told me, we all have problems, Betty. But when it comes to children, you sacrifice. Sacrifice? Hadn't 6 years of my life been enough sacrifice? Hadn't $52,000 of my savings been enough sacrifice? Hadn't losing my health, my social life, my freedom been enough sacrifice? But no one wanted to hear that. They only wanted me to continue being the perfect grandmother who kept quiet and put up with everything. Tiffany also started a campaign on social media. She posted photos of the children with sad faces and captions like, "When the people you love most turn their backs on you in the hardest moments." Pregnant and alone, but God never abandons his children. She didn't mention my name directly, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Tiffany's friends started commenting on those posts with messages of support. Oh, friend, how awful that your family isn't supporting you. The kids aren't to blame. May God forgive whoever is making them suffer. A true grandmother would never abandon her grandchildren. Each comment was like a stab in my heart. But the worst came when Tiffany decided to show up at my job. Yes, she went to the office where I worked part-time as a receptionist, bringing the 3 children in dirty clothes, with faces that looked like they hadn't eaten breakfast. She sat in the waiting room and started crying dramatically while the children shouted, "We want Grandma Betty!" My co-workers didn't know where to look. The scandal was such that my boss had to call me into his office. "Betty, I don't know what family problems you have, but you can't bring this drama into the workplace. I had to explain the whole situation, feeling the deepest humiliation of my life. A woman of 67 years having to justify why she didn't want to continue being exploited by her daughter-in-law. That night, when I got home after one of the most humiliating days of my life, I found Tiffany waiting for me at my door. But this time she wasn't alone. She had a man in a suit with her who introduced himself as her lawyer. "Ma'am Betty," the lawyer told me in a professional but threatening voice, "my client has informed me that you have been providing childcare for years and have now abruptly abandoned that responsibility, putting the children at risk. We are considering filing charges for child abandonment and neglect of vulnerable persons." I felt as if the world was collapsing beneath my feet. Tiffany had not only called the police, not only destroyed my family and social reputation, but was now threatening to put me in jail for refusing to continue being her slave. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, "My client is concerned about your mental stability. The drastic change in your behavior suggests you might need a psychiatric evaluation." Tiffany smiled behind the lawyer. Her plan was perfect. If I didn't return to watch her children voluntarily, she was going to force me to do it through the courts or commit me to a psychiatric hospital. That night, alone in my house, I cried as I hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, but from rage. Rage for having allowed myself to be used for so long. Rage for having believed that family love justified any abuse. Rage for living in a world where a 67-year-old woman didn't have the right to say no without being crucified by the whole family. But in the midst of that darkness, something began to change inside me. It was no longer just exhaustion I felt. It was determination. If Tiffany wanted a war, she was going to get a war. But this time, I wasn't going to fight alone. After the visit from Tiffany's lawyer, I knew the time had come to stop being the silent victim. For 6 years, I had quietly endured everything, believing that was the proper way to handle family problems. But when someone threatens you with jail for refusing to be their slave, it's time to change the rules of the game. The next day, early in the morning, I went to the bank. For years, I had been giving money for the children's expenses without keeping records. It was time to get all my bank statements, all the transfers, all the withdrawals I had made to support Tiffany's children. The bank employee, an older woman like me, looked at me with compassion when I explained what I needed. "Oh, Ma'am Betty," she said as she printed page after page of bank movements, "my own daughter does the same thing to me. They use us as ATMs, and then they make us feel guilty if we protest." Her words comforted me. I wasn't the only woman in this situation. The numbers on paper were even more devastating than I remembered. In 6 years, I had spent exactly $54,600 on expenses related to my grandchildren. Diapers, formula, clothes, shoes, medicine, toys, food, medical expenses. Everything documented, everything recorded. While Tiffany was buying $400 handbags, I was buying antibiotics for her children with my pension. After the bank, I went straight to an electronics store. If Tiffany wanted to play dirty, I could too. I bought a small digital recorder. Every phone conversation, every visit to my house, every threat, everything would be recorded from now on. There would be no more my word against hers. That afternoon, like clockwork, Tiffany arrived with the children at my door. This time, I had the recorder turned on in my pocket. "Betty, I need you to help me today. The kids haven't eaten and I don't have money to buy food." A total lie. The day before, I had seen her social media where she was showing off her lunch at an expensive restaurant with her friends in New York City. "Tiffany," I told her calmly, "your children are your responsibility, not mine. If you don't have money to feed them, maybe you should consider looking for a job instead of having lunch at expensive restaurants." Her face fell apart. She didn't expect me to know about her outing the day before. "That was a birthday gift from a friend," she yelled. "I can't believe you're spying on me on social media instead of worrying about your grandchildren." Always the same tactic, turning herself into the victim when confronted with the truth. "I'm not spying on anyone," I replied, "but it's interesting that you have money for restaurants, but not for feeding your children." The recorder captured every word, every tone of voice. This conversation would serve me later. That night, I received an unexpected call. It was my neighbor, Monica, a 62-year-old woman who lived 3 houses down. "Betty, can we talk? I've been watching everything that's happening at your house, and I think you need to know you're not alone in this." The next day, Monica came over for coffee and told me her own story. Her daughter had done the exact same thing for 4 years. She had turned her into a full-time nanny while she looked for work and went out partying. "I spent my savings, I lost my health, and when I finally said enough, she accused me of not loving my granddaughter. I had to go to therapy to understand that saying no didn't make me a bad grandmother." Monica put me in touch with other women in the neighborhood who had experienced similar situations. It was incredible to discover how many grandmothers were being exploited by irresponsible adult children. All of them had kept silent for years. All of them had felt guilty for wanting to reclaim their lives. "Betty," Monica told me, "what Tiffany is doing has a name: economic and emotional elder abuse. It's not family love, it's pure and simple exploitation." I had never thought of it that way, but she was right. If a stranger had treated me the way Tiffany had treated me for 6 years, I would have called the police from day one. With the support of these women, I began to document everything systematically. Every time Tiffany showed up at my door, every threat, every manipulation, everything was recorded. I also started taking pictures of the times she dropped off the children and picked them up. Evidence that I was the de facto caregiver while she lived like a single woman. A week later, Tiffany showed up with a new strategy. This time, she was accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as a social worker. "Ma'am Betty, we received an anonymous report about possible child neglect at this address. We need to inspect the living conditions of the children." My heart stopped for a moment, but then I remembered that the children didn't live with me. "The children don't live here," I explained to the social worker. "They live with their parents as they should. I am just the grandmother." Tiffany had lied again. She had told social services that the children lived with me to create more problems. The social worker apologized for the confusion and left, but Tiffany remained. "I told you this wasn't going to end here, Betty. I can make your life impossible until you come back and watch my children." Her mask had completely fallen. She was no longer pretending it was about the children's well-being. It was pure vengeance for having lost her personal slave. "Tiffany," I told her with a calm that surprised myself, "you can bring all the lawyers, social workers, and police you want, but I'm not raising your children anymore. Find a daycare, hire a nanny, or better yet, stay home and be the mother you should have been from the beginning." Her response was predictable. "You're a horrible grandmother. The children are going to grow up hating you for this." It was her last resort, the threat that I would lose my grandchildren's love. But Monica had already prepared me for this. Children who grow up seeing their parents exploit their grandparents don't learn to love. They learn to use. You're doing them a favor by teaching them that boundaries exist. That night, as I reviewed all the evidence I had collected, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I was no longer alone in this battle. I had documentation, I had witnesses, I had emotional support. But above all, I had something I had lost for 6 years: my dignity back. The next day, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Joe, a lawyer specializing in elder rights, whom Monica had recommended to me. "Ma'am Betty, your neighbor told me about your situation. I'd like to offer you a free consultation. What you described constitutes economic and emotional abuse, and there are legal ways to protect yourself." For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. Tiffany had made a mistake by involving lawyers and legal threats. She thought she would intimidate me and make me rush back to watch her children. But what she had accomplished was waking me up completely. If she wanted a legal battle, she was going to get one. But this time, I would have a lawyer too. During the consultation with Joe, I learned that I had more rights than I imagined. "Ma'am Betty, no grandmother has a legal obligation to watch her grandchildren. The fact that you did it voluntarily for years doesn't create any permanent legal responsibility. You have the right to change your mind whenever you wish." "And the threats from her lawyer about child abandonment?" I asked. Joe laughed. "Pure intimidation with no legal basis. The children are not abandoned. They are with their parents. You never had legal custody, so you cannot be accused of abandonment." I left that office feeling as if I had recovered my power. For years, I had been led to believe that it was my obligation to sacrifice my life for Tiffany's convenience. But it turned out the law was on my side. Love is not slavery, and being a grandmother doesn't mean giving up my rights as a human being. That night, I prepared my counterattack. If Tiffany wanted to play with lawyers and threats, I was going to teach her how to play that game correctly. With Joe as my attorney and all the documentation in order, it was time to go on the offensive. For 6 years, I had been reactive, always responding to Tiffany's demands and manipulations. But now I had the tools to completely change the dynamic of this war she had started. Joe helped me draft a formal letter addressed to both Tiffany and her lawyer. In clear legal terms, it established that I had no obligation to provide childcare, that any future threats would be considered harassment, and that I had the right to request a restraining order if the harassment continued. The letter included copies of all my bank statements, evidence of the $54,600 I had spent, and recordings of the recent threats. "Betty," Joe told me as we reviewed the document, "this letter is going to completely change the tone of the negotiations. Tiffany is going to realize that she's no longer dealing with a helpless victim, but with someone who knows her rights and is willing to defend them." The day we sent the letter, I also implemented other protective measures. I changed the locks on my house and installed a security system with cameras at the entrance. If Tiffany wanted to continue harassing me, everything would be recorded as additional evidence. I also informed my job about the situation and provided them with a photo of Tiffany so they wouldn't let her into the building. The response was immediate. 3 days later, Tiffany's lawyer called Joe asking for a meeting. "It looks like your letter scared them," Joe told me with a smile. "They want to negotiate." It was exactly what we had expected. Threats and intimidation only work against people who don't know their rights. But Tiffany wasn't going to give up so easily. When she realized that the legal tactics weren't working, she escalated to something much more personal and cruel. She started a systematic campaign to alienate my grandchildren from me, telling them that I had abandoned them because I didn't love them anymore. My oldest grandchild, who was 6 years old, found me at the supermarket one afternoon and asked me with tears in his eyes, "Grandma Betty, is it true that you don't love us anymore because Mommy is having another baby?" That moment broke my heart. Tiffany was using my own grandchildren as emotional weapons, damaging their psychological stability to try to manipulate me. I knelt down to his height and explained to him in simple words, "My love, I love you more than my own life. But Mommy needs to learn to take care of you herself, like all mums do. I will always be your grandma who loves you, but I also need to take care of myself." It was hard to explain concepts like boundaries and manipulation to a 6-year-old. That night, I called Michael and made it very clear what I thought about his wife's tactics. Michael, if Tiffany keeps using the children as emotional weapons, I'm going to request that a child psychologist evaluate the damage she is causing them. No child should be manipulated that way. My son fell silent. I think he was finally beginning to see his wife's true character. Meanwhile, my support network continued to grow. Monica introduced me to other grandmothers who had been through similar situations, and together we started a small support group that met on Wednesday afternoons. It was incredible to hear stories so similar to mine. Adult children who had turned their mothers into full-time nannies, who had exploited their maternal love until they were completely exhausted. What hurts me the most, a woman named Carla told me, is that my own daughter makes me feel guilty for wanting to have a life of my own at 70 years old. As if raising my own children wasn't enough. As if I now have to raise hers, too. We all nodded. That manufactured guilt was the most powerful weapon they used against us. The group helped me understand something fundamental. What I had lived through wasn't just a personal problem. It was a social pattern. There was a whole generation of older women being exploited by adult children who refused to take on their parental responsibilities. And all of us had kept silent for years, believing that was family love. 2 weeks after sending the legal letter, Tiffany appeared at my door with a new strategy. This time, she didn't come with lawyers or threats. She came crying, with an act worthy of a cheap movie. "Betty, please forgive me. I'm pregnant. I'm scared. I don't know how I'm going to manage 4 children. I need you." For a moment, my maternal instinct almost betrayed me. Seeing a pregnant woman crying awakened all my protective impulses. But then I remembered Joe's words. "Betty, manipulators always come back with tears when threats don't work. Don't confuse manipulation with genuine repentance." "Tiffany," I told her, keeping the door closed, "if you're really sorry, prove it. Find a job. Hire a nanny. Learn to be the mother your children need. But I'm not going to be your easy solution anymore." Her tears dried up immediately, and I saw her transform back into the cold, calculating person she really was. "All right, Betty," she said in a completely different voice. "If you want to play this way, we'll play. But I warn you, you're going to lose more than you gain." It was a clear threat, but this time I wasn't scared. I had a lawyer, I had evidence, and I had something more powerful. I no longer cared about losing something that had never been healthy in the first place. The next day, Tiffany implemented her threat. She went to the children's school and told the teachers that I had been harassing them, that I had become unstable, and that they shouldn't allow me to get near them. As a result, when I went to pick up my oldest grandchild to take him to the dentist, an appointment I had scheduled and paid for, they told me I couldn't take him. The humiliation was enormous, but Joe had prepared me for this type of tactic. I immediately called the school from the parking lot and asked to speak with the principal. I explained the legal situation and informed her that I had rights as a grandmother and that any restriction based on false accusations would be considered defamation. Furthermore, I added, I have medical documentation that proves I have been the one taking the children to all their medical appointments for the last 6 years. If they want to verify my mental stability, I can provide them with recent psychological evaluations. The principal apologized and allowed me to pick up my grandchild, but the damage was already done. Tiffany had managed to create doubts about my character at the school. That night, while I was helping my grandson with his homework, it was Wednesday, one of the days Michael brought the children to me because Tiffany was out relaxing, the child asked me, "Grandma, why does Mommy say you're mad at us?" Again, using the children as pawns in her cruel game. "My love," I explained patiently, I could never be mad at you. But sometimes adults have problems that children don't understand. The only thing you need to know is that I love you and I always will. But inside, my heart was breaking to see how Tiffany was psychologically damaging her own children to get her way. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was no longer going to play defensively. If Tiffany wanted an all-out war, where she used the children as weapons and publicly defamed my character, then I was going to expose the whole truth. It was time for the whole family, all the neighbors, everyone who had been judging me, to know exactly who Tiffany really was. Joe had mentioned that I had enough evidence for a solid case of harassment and defamation, but more than winning a legal battle, I wanted to win something much more important. I wanted to recover my reputation and protect my grandchildren from the psychological harm their mother was causing them. The next family gathering would be in 2 weeks, at my sister Sharon's house for my nephew's birthday. The whole family would be there, including Tiffany and Michael. It was the perfect moment for my final counterattack. During the 2 weeks leading up to my nephew's birthday, I meticulously prepared what would be my moment of truth. Joe helped me organize all the evidence into a clear and compelling presentation. Bank statements, audio recordings, text messages, testimonies from the children's teachers. Everything was perfectly documented and organized chronologically. Betty, Joe told me as we reviewed the materials, you have one of the most solid cases of economic and emotional elder abuse I've ever seen. Any judge who sees this evidence would immediately understand what you have lived through. But my goal wasn't to go to trial. My goal was for my own family to understand the truth before it was too late. I also prepared something else, a detailed report of all the expenses I had incurred for 6 years, not just the money, but the time. I calculated that I had dedicated an average of 12 hours daily to watching the children, which was equivalent to approximately 26,000 hours of unpaid labor. If I had been a professional nanny, I would have earned close to $300,000 for those services. The night before the family gathering, Monica came to keep me company while I finished organizing everything. Are you sure you want to do this, Betty? Once you say everything, there's no turning back. She was right. Publicly exposing Tiffany was going to create a definitive rupture in the family, but I had already made my decision. Monica, I replied, for 6 years, I have kept silent while she slowly destroyed me. I have allowed them to paint me as the villain while she presents herself as the victim. No more. If they are going to judge me, let it be for the complete truth, not for Tiffany's lies. The day of the birthday, I arrived early at Sharon's house in Denver, Colorado. I wanted to talk to her before the others arrived. My sister greeted me with obvious coldness. Tiffany had done an excellent job poisoning the family against me. Betty, I hope you come with a better attitude today. This is my son's birthday. I don't want drama. Sharon, I told her calmly, I just want you to know that today you are going to hear things you might not expect. But everything I am going to say is the truth, and I have evidence to back it up. My sister looked at me with distrust, but nodded. When the relatives started arriving, I could feel the tension in the air, the looks of disapproval, the whispers, the physical distance. Tiffany had done her job perfectly. Everyone saw me as the cruel grandmother who had abandoned her grandchildren out of pure selfishness. Tiffany arrived late, of course, making a dramatic entrance with her 5-month belly perfectly highlighted by a tight pink dress. She came with the 3 children impeccably dressed and groomed, the perfect image of the devoted, hard-working mother. Michael carried bags of expensive gifts, showing how generous the family was despite my cruelties. During the first hour of the party, Tiffany dedicated herself to reinforcing her narrative. Subtle but poisonous comments. Oh, it's so nice that Betty could come. The kids miss her so much. It's so hard watching 3 children alone. especially being pregnant, but a person does what she has to do for love. I hope someday Betty remembers how important family is. Each comment was like a stab, but I remained serene. I knew my moment would come. Meanwhile, I observed the reactions of the relatives. Some nodded understandingly at Tiffany's comments. Others looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and pity. Only my brother-in-law, Robert, seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. The moment came when Sharon asked for attention to make a toast to her son. When she finished, I stood up. Family, I would also like to say a few words. I know many of you have heard one version of what has happened between Tiffany and me. Today, I want you to hear the complete version, with evidence. The silence that followed was so dense you could cut it with a knife. Tiffany looked at me with poorly disguised panic. Michael looked confused. The other relatives seemed uncomfortable but curious. I began by telling them the complete truth of the last 6 years. Not just the facts, but the real numbers. For 6 years, I have spent $54,600 of my savings supporting Tiffany's children. I have all the bank statements here to prove it. I took out the folders of documents and began showing them the evidence. I have worked an average of 12 hours daily as an unpaid nanny, which is equivalent to a full-time job with no days off, no vacations, no bonuses. The relatives' faces began to change. The numbers didn't lie. I continued, showing them the audio recordings where Tiffany threatened me, the text messages where she emotionally blackmailed me, the photos of her at expensive restaurants while I bought medicine for her children with my pension. Here you have evidence that while I was spending my savings on diapers, she was buying $400 handbags. Tiffany tried to interrupt. Betty, this is ridiculous. You're exaggerating everything. But I kept speaking, keeping my voice calm and presenting evidence after evidence. The receipts for medicine, the pediatrician bills that I had paid, the testimonies from the teachers, that I was the one who attended all the school meetings. And when I finally said I couldn't do it anymore, I continued, Tiffany threatened me with lawyers, called the police alleging child abandonment, went to my job to publicly humiliate me, and told the children that I didn't love them anymore to emotionally manipulate me. The silence in the room was deafening. Robert was the first to speak. Betty, I didn't know any of this. Tiffany told us that you had changed overnight, that you had become selfish for no reason. Other relatives began to murmur among themselves, processing all the information. Tiffany, seeing that she was losing control of the narrative, stood up dramatically. I can't believe you're believing these lies. Betty is making all this up because she's resentful that I'm having another baby. But her act no longer worked. The bank documents, the recordings, everything was irrefutable evidence. My sister Sharon approached to check the papers. Her face turned pale as she read the bank statements. Betty, I didn't know you had spent so much money. The amount was devastating even for someone seeing it for the first time. Michael, who had been silent all this time, finally exploded. Tiffany, is all this true? You've been manipulating my mother for years. His wife tried to defend herself, but the evidence was too clear. For the first time in years, my son was seeing his wife clearly. Of course not, Tiffany yelled. Your mother is exaggerating everything. I just needed help like any young mother. But her voice sounded desperate, no longer convincing. The numbers spoke for themselves. Then I pulled out my final card. A report from the child psychologist I had consulted about the emotional impact on the children. This professional confirms that using children as emotional weapons against their grandparents causes severe psychological damage. Tiffany has not only abused me, she is damaging her own children to manipulate me. At that moment, the children who had been playing in the backyard came running in. My oldest grandson approached me and hugged me. Grandma Betty, Why is everyone yelling? Tiffany immediately tried to pull him away from me, but Michael stopped her. No, he told his wife firmly. No, P. My mother has the right to see her grandchildren without you using them as pawns in your games. It was the first time Michael had defended anyone other than Tiffany. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. The relatives who had previously looked at me with disapproval now looked at Tiffany with disgust. The truth had that power. Once exposed, it was impossible to ignore. Tiffany, seeing that she had completely lost control of the situation and that the entire family now knew the truth, did something no one expected. She grabbed her belly dramatically and began to moan. "Oh no! Something is wrong with the baby. It hurts so much." She dropped onto the sofa, faking contractions, with an act so exaggerated it seemed straight out of a low-budget soap opera. Panic immediately took over the room. Michael ran to her. Relatives started talking about calling an ambulance, and I stood watching the most pathetic scene I had ever witnessed in my life. Tiffany had played her final card, faking a medical emergency to divert attention from all the evidence I had just presented. "Quick, call 911, Michael shouted, completely convinced by his wife's performance. "Tiffany, breathe. Everything is going to be okay." But I had lived with this woman for 6 years. I knew her manipulations better than anyone, and this was the most desperate of them all. "Michael," I said calmly, "if she were really having a medical emergency, she wouldn't be speaking so clearly, nor would her cheeks be flushed. She's faking it." My comment caused several relatives to look at me in horror. How could I be so cruel as to accuse a pregnant woman of faking an emergency? But Robert, who is a retired doctor, approached to examine her. "Tiffany, let me check your pulse and blood pressure," he said professionally. She immediately became nervous. "I don't need you to check me. I need to go to the hospital." Her resistance to being examined by a real doctor was suspicious. "If you really have an emergency," Robert insisted, "I need to assess your vital signs before the ambulance arrives." Tiffany had no choice but to let him check her. After a few minutes, Robert stood up with a serious expression. "Tiffany, your pulse is normal, your blood pressure is normal, and you show no signs of fetal distress. Are you sure you feel pain?" Tiffany's face fell apart. She had been caught by a medical professional in front of the whole family. Her last desperate resort had failed miserably. "Me? Well, maybe it was just a scare," she muttered, miraculously recovering from her medical emergency. The silence that followed was more powerful than any accusation. All the relatives realized what had just happened. Tiffany had faked a medical emergency to avoid facing the consequences of her years of manipulation and abuse. It was the height of dishonesty. Sharon was the first to speak. "Tiffany, did you just fake a medical emergency? Seriously?" Her voice was full of disgust and disappointment. It was one thing to lie about family problems, but faking that an unborn baby was in danger crossed every imaginable line. Michael stood looking at his wife as if seeing her for the first time in his life. "Tiffany, what did you just do?" His voice trembled with disbelief and humiliation. In that moment, I think he finally understood who he had married. Tiffany tried to defend herself. "I did feel something. Maybe it was nerves because of all this attacking me." But no one believed her anymore. She had shown her true character in the most grotesque way possible. Even the relatives who had been on her side now looked at her with repulsion. "Tiffany," I told her with a voice firmer than I had heard in years, "faking a pregnant medical emergency is the lowest thing you've done so far. And that's saying a lot considering everything you've done to me for 6 years." I no longer had to hold back. Everyone had seen her true nature. The children, who had been scared by their mother's apparent medical problem, now looked confused. My oldest grandson asked me, "Grandma, is Mommy okay?" The baby is fine. I had to comfort him and explain that everything was okay, while internally I was horrified that Tiffany had even used her pregnancy as a weapon of manipulation. Michael took the children's hands. Kids, let's go out to the backyard for a moment while the adults finish talking. He needed to protect his children from seeing more of this public humiliation. It was the first responsible parental decision I had seen him make in years. When the children left, the tension in the room was palpable. Tiffany realized she had made a fatal mistake. Faking a medical emergency had been the straw that broke the camel's back for everyone present. It was no longer just a matter of family problems. She had shown a lack of character that was impossible to ignore. "I think you should leave, Tiffany," Sharon told her in a cold voice I had never heard from her. "This is my family's home, and you are no longer welcome here." My sister, who had criticized me days earlier for not helping enough, was now throwing Tiffany out of her house. "You can't do this," Tiffany protested. "I'm part of this family. I'm pregnant with Betty's great-grandchild." But her protests sounded desperate and pathetic. She had burned all her bridges in a single afternoon. Robert approached me. "Betty, I owe you a huge apology. We all owe you an apology. We didn't know. We had no idea what you had been living through." His public acknowledgement of my suffering moved me to tears. After years of being the villain, someone finally recognized my pain. Other relatives began to approach with similar apologies. "Betty, forgive us for judging you without knowing the whole story. We didn't know you had spent so much money. We understand now why you needed to set boundaries." It was overwhelming to receive so much validation after years of misunderstanding. Michael returned without the children, who had stayed playing in the backyard with their cousins. His face reflected a mixture of shame, confusion, and something that seemed to be the awakening of a conscience that had been asleep for years. He approached me with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said in a broken voice, "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I didn't see what Tiffany was doing to you. I'm so sorry I allowed you to sacrifice your life for my family." It was the first time in years that my son spoke to me as a son and not as Tiffany's husband. Tiffany, seeing that she had lost even her own husband, made one last desperate attempt. "Michael, you can't believe your mother. She's exaggerating everything. I just needed help like any mother." But her words no longer held power. Everyone had seen the evidence. Everyone had witnessed her pathetic performance. "Tiffany," Michael told her with a firmness that I had never heard from him, "no more. Mum is right. You have taken advantage of her for years, and I have been an accomplice by allowing it. This ends today." It was incredible to see my son finally find his backbone after years of being manipulated. "What does that mean?" Tiffany asked with panic in her voice. She realized she was losing not only the extended family, but possibly her own husband. Her kingdom of manipulation was completely crumbling. "It means," Michael replied, "that you're going to look for a job, you're going to hire a professional nanny, and you're going to stop using my mother as your personal slave. And it means that if you ever threaten or harass her again, I myself will support any legal action she wants to take against you." The power had completely shifted hands. For years, Tiffany had controlled the family narrative, manipulated everyone's emotions, and turned the victim into the villain. But the truth had an unstoppable force, and once exposed, it had destroyed her entire architecture of lies. Tiffany got up from the sofa with the little dignity she had left. "This isn't going to end here," she muttered. But her threat sounded empty. She no longer had an army. She no longer had allies. She no longer had power. She was just a pregnant woman who had been exposed as the manipulator she really was. When she left, taking with her the remnants of her destroyed credibility, the silence in the room was different. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of a secret, but the liberating silence of the truth, finally spoken. After Tiffany walked out of Sharon's house, humiliated, the family atmosphere completely changed. For the first time in years, I could breathe freely at a family gathering. The whispers and looks of disapproval had been replaced by sincere hugs and genuine apologies. But I knew this was only the beginning. Tiffany wasn't going to accept this public defeat without attempting some kind of final revenge. Over the following weeks, things changed dramatically in my family. Michael started bringing the children to me regularly, but not so I would watch them while he worked, but so we could spend quality time as grandmother and grandchildren. "Mum," he told me one day, "I want my kids to have a normal relationship with you, not an exploitative one." It was beautiful to be able to play with my grandchildren without feeling the weight of total responsibility on my shoulders. I could read them stories without worrying about changing diapers all night. I could take them to the park without agonizing over medical expenses. For the first time in 6 years, being a grandmother was a joy and not a burden. Michael also started telling me things he had previously kept secret. "Mum, Tiffany always told me that you enjoyed watching the kids, that you felt useful doing it. She told me that if we took that responsibility away from you, you would feel rejected and depressed." It was incredible to discover how Tiffany had manipulated even my own son's perceptions of my feelings. "She also told me that the money you spent was your way of showing love," Michael continued with shame. "That grandmothers who truly love their grandchildren always contribute financially. I thought you were happy to do it." The manipulation had been so systematic that it had brainwashed the entire family. Meanwhile, my support network with Monica and the other grandmothers had strengthened enormously. We now met 2 times a week, and we had started helping other older women who were in similar situations. Betty, a new woman in the group, told me, "Your story gave me the strength to confront my own daughter. For 4 years, I've been raising my 2 grandchildren while she lives like a single woman." It was powerful to discover that my experience could help other women reclaim their lives. We had created a real support system where we validated each other and gave each other practical strategies for setting healthy boundaries with manipulative adult children. Joe, my lawyer, kept me informed about the legal aspects. "Betty, since we sent that letter, Tiffany hasn't made any legal move against you. Her lawyer probably warned her that she doesn't have a case. In fact, if she continues to harass you, we have a solid case against her." It was reassuring to know that the law was on my side. But Tiffany hadn't completely disappeared. Michael told me that the situation at home was unbearable. "Mum, since what happened at Aunt Sharon's house, Tiffany is furious. She blames everyone but herself. She says the family betrayed her, that you manipulated her with lies, that everyone is unfair to her." Her ability to distort reality was truly impressive. "But the worst part," Michael continued, "is that now that she has to watch the children herself, she's realizing how difficult it really is. The kids cry for you all the time. They ask when they can stay with you again. She doesn't know what to do with them." The irony was perfect. After years of taking my labor for granted, she finally understood its value. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the family confrontation, I received an unexpected call. It was my sister-in-law, Jane, Michael's sister, who lived in another city. "Betty," Tiffany called me crying, telling me that the whole family had turned against her unfairly. She wanted to tell me her version before you manipulated me too. I laughed. Even after the public humiliation, Tiffany was still trying to control the narrative. "And what exactly did she tell you?" I asked with curiosity. Jane's response surprised me. "Well, after listening to her version, I asked her to show me evidence of her accusations. She couldn't show me anything. Then I asked her if it was true that you had spent more than $50,000. And she admitted that yes, but said you had done it voluntarily, period. Jane, I told her, slave labor is also technically voluntary at first, but that doesn't make it any less abusive. My sister-in-law understood immediately. The truth had that clarity that penetrated any manipulation. But the most significant call came one Thursday night. It was Michael, and he sounded more serious than usual. "Mum, I need to tell you something important. Tiffany finally confessed something that changes everything." My heart raced. What else could there be? It turns out that for these 6 years, Tiffany has been lying about her financial situation, Michael told me in a trembling voice. She has a secret savings account with more than $80,000. The entire time you were spending your pension on our children, she had enough money to cover all those expenses. The world stopped for a moment. Not only had I been exploited as a free nanny, but I had been economically defrauded, while Tiffany secretly accumulated money. "How did you discover this?" I asked, trying to control my indignation. "I was reviewing some papers for the baby's insurance when I found the bank statements," Michael explained. "When I confronted her, she first denied everything, then said it was money from her family, but finally admitted that she had been saving it for emergencies while you were paying for everything for the children." The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. For years, while I worried about not having enough money for medicine or diapers, Tiffany had a hidden fortune. She had turned my maternal love into her personal enrichment plan. "Michael," I told him with a calm I didn't feel, "I want you to document that bank account. This is no longer just emotional abuse. It's economic fraud." My son promised to get all the information. For the first time, he was completely on my side. That night, I called Joe to tell him about the discovery. His reaction was immediate. "Betty, this changes everything legally. If she had economic resources and allowed you to spend your savings while feigning necessity, we have grounds for a lawsuit for fraud and financial elder abuse. This is a federal crime." The irony was incredible. Tiffany, in her eagerness to control and manipulate, had made mistakes that could now result in serious legal consequences. Her greed and dishonesty had finally been completely exposed. The next day, Michael came to my house in New York with a folder full of documents. Bank statements, transfers, even receipts for expensive purchases Tiffany had made while I was spending my savings. "Mum, there's more. I also discovered that she has been selling some of the toys and clothes you bought for the children. She sold them online and kept the money." It was the height of dehumanization. Not only had she abused my love and my money, but she had turned the gifts for my grandchildren into her personal source of additional income. She was a person with no moral limits. "Michael," I told him as I reviewed all the evidence, "your wife is not just manipulative. She's a professional scammer, and I think it's time she faced the legal consequences of her actions." My son nodded, with tears in his eyes. He finally understood completely who he had married. That afternoon, I scheduled an urgent meeting with Joe. With all this new evidence, it was no longer just about setting family boundaries. It was about seeking real justice for years of systematic abuse. Tiffany had severely underestimated the grandmother she had been exploiting. The war she had started was about to end, but not as she expected. With all the evidence of economic fraud in my hands, Joe and I prepared a legal strategy that Tiffany never saw coming. Not only were we going to sue her for the $54,600 she had allowed me to spend while she had secret savings, but also for punitive damages for financial elder abuse. "Betty," Joe told me with a smile, "this is going to be more than a legal victory. It's going to be a lesson about the consequences of exploiting older people." But before proceeding legally, I decided to give Tiffany one last opportunity to do the right thing. I asked Michael to organize a family meeting on neutral ground, Joe's office. I wanted her to see all the evidence of her fraud and give her the opportunity to return the money and genuinely apologize before things escalated to court. The meeting was exactly what I expected. Tiffany arrived with her lawyer, maintaining her air of a misunderstood victim until the last moment. "I don't understand why we need lawyers to solve family problems," she began with her usual sweet voice. But when Joe placed all the bank statements from her secret account on the table, her face completely fell apart. "Tiffany," I said, looking her directly in the eyes, "for 6 years, you allowed me to spend my savings while you secretly accumulated more than $80,000. This isn't a family conflict. It's economic fraud." Her lawyer quickly reviewed the documents, and his expression turned serious. He knew his client was in serious legal trouble. Those savings were for emergencies," Tiffany stammered. "I didn't know Betty was spending so much money." Lie after lie, even when the evidence was irrefutable. Her inability to take responsibility was pathological. Joe intervened professionally. "Ms. Tiffany, we have documentation that you knew exactly how much money Mom Betty was spending, because there are text messages where you specifically asked her to buy expensive things for the children. We also have evidence that you sold the gifts she bought and kept the money." Tiffany's lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she turned even paler. "What? What do you want me to do?" she finally asked, her arrogance replaced by real panic. For the first time in years, she realized there were real consequences for her actions. "We want full restitution," I replied firmly. "The $54,600 you made me spend, plus interest, plus a public apology to the entire family for the lies you spread about me. If you accept this voluntarily, we will not proceed with criminal charges." Tiffany looked at her lawyer, searching for some way out, but he shook his head. "Ma'am, my recommendation is that you accept the agreement. The evidence against you is overwhelming, and the charges for financial elder abuse can result in jail time." Reality finally hit her like a bucket of cold water. "I don't have $80,000 liquid," she murmured. "I would have to sell some investments." It was incredible. Even at this moment, she was still trying to minimize what she had done. It wasn't her investments she had to sacrifice. It was my stolen money she had to return. Michael, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. "Tiffany, you are going to return every single penny you stole from my mother. And if you don't have the liquid money, you're going to sell whatever is necessary to get it." My son had finally found his voice and his backbone. "Steal?" Tiffany protested. "I never stole anything. She gave that money voluntarily." Even when faced with irrefutable evidence, she remained incapable of admitting the truth. Her disconnect from reality was truly impressive. Allowing someone to spend their savings under false pretenses while you have your own resources is fraud, Joe explained patiently. The fact that the victim gave the money voluntarily does not change the criminal nature of the deception. The words victim and criminal seemed to hit her physically. After 2 hours of tense negotiations, Tiffany finally accepted the terms. She would return the $54,600 in 3 payments over the next 6 months, make a public written apology to the entire family, and sign an agreement acknowledging that she had financially abused me for years. But the most important thing for me was not the money. It was seeing how, for the first time in 6 years, Tiffany had to face the real consequences of her actions. She could no longer manipulate. She could no longer lie. She could no longer turn herself into the victim. The truth had come out, and justice was being served. 6 months later, when I received the final restitution payment, my life had completely changed. I had recovered not only my money, but my dignity, my family, and my peace of mind. Michael had divorced Tiffany and had shared custody of the children. "Mum," he told me, "when I got married, I thought I had found a life partner. It turns out I had married a professional scammer." The children now came to visit me 2 times a week, but as normal grandchildren visiting their grandmother. We played, we cooked together, I taught them new things, and when they got tired or misbehaved, I returned them to their father. It was exactly as it should have been from the beginning. My support group with Monica and the other grandmothers had grown to include more than 20 women. We had helped dozens of grandmothers establish healthy boundaries with abusive adult children. "Betty," a new woman told me, "your story saved my life. I had been exploited by my daughter for 8 years and thought it was normal." I had also started giving talks at community centres about elder abuse. It was important for other women to know that family love does not justify exploitation, that being a grandmother does not mean giving up all your rights as a human being, and that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. As for Tiffany, the consequences of her actions continued long after the legal agreement. Her reputation in the family was destroyed forever. No one trusted her, no one wanted to be near her, and her social support network had completely disappeared. She had lost her husband, the respect of her children, and the place she had held in our family. The fourth baby was born 3 months after the divorce, and Tiffany found herself being a single mother of 4 children, without the support network she had abused for years. Michael religiously paid child support, but there was no longer a slave grandmother to watch them for free, no longer extra money from my savings, no longer emotional backing from the family. "It's ironic," Monica commented to me one afternoon while we were having coffee. "She spent years telling you that grandmothers who truly love their grandchildren make any sacrifice. Now she's learning what it really means to sacrifice for your children without exploiting anyone else." A year after this whole ordeal, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Tiffany, handwritten, asking for genuine forgiveness for the first time. "Betty," the letter said, "now that I am raising my 4 children alone, I finally understand what I did to you all those years. There is no excuse for having abused your love and generosity. I understand if you can never forgive me." I kept the letter in my desk without replying. Maybe someday I could forgive her, but the forgiveness would have to be for my own peace of mind, not for her benefit. I had learned that my kindness was not weakness, that my love was not an obligation, and that my forgiveness was not automatic. Now, at 68 years old, I have something I hadn't had in years, a life of my own. I travel with my friends, I take painting classes, I read the books I want to read, I sleep the hours I need to sleep. I love my grandchildren deeply, but that love no longer enslaves me. I have learned that true love includes healthy boundaries, mutual respect, and reciprocity. The most important lesson I learned is that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. No matter how many years you've allowed yourself to be mistreated, no matter how much guilt they've made you feel, you can always decide that enough is enough. Old age is not synonymous with obligatory sacrifice, and being a grandmother does not mean giving up being a person. Today, when other women tell me stories similar to mine, I tell them the same thing I wish someone had told me 6 years ago. Your love for your grandchildren is beautiful, but don't let anyone turn it into your prison. You deserve respect, you deserve boundaries, and you deserve to live your own life. True love never requires you to destroy yourself. And that, finally, is the truth that set me free.